It is recording, everybody.
Yay! So welcome everyone. Hi, thanks for coming to the TOT Booster today. We are, can I say again how happy it is to see you all? It's wonderful. So we're gonna just spend a little bit of time today. The goal is to sort of do some checking in, to do some center updates, talk a little bit about kind of what everybody's been thinking about and a lot of the resources that the center has been coming out with to support schools. Also, and I think hopefully Jen will be able to lead us through some of that returning from crisis work that she and the Returning to Schools Committee are doing. And Brandy's going to talk a little bit about the trauma-informed brief that we shared with you, and then some additional resources that are, to highlight a couple things. There's so many things coming out from the center that it's a little overwhelming. So Brandy's going to help us guide us through some of the highlights. And then we're going to use that to jump off on a discussion about what you found that's been helpful in supporting schools right now, as well as some of the discoveries you've made in virtual training, how to do all of your awesome ways to do OTRs in context. And then the second half of our time together, we're hoping to get your feedback on the .q 2.0. So hopefully some of you had a chance to take a look and use it and give us feedback. And we have some exciting ways to collect data on that. Am I missing anything? And if folks are in cohort 5 and are here at the very end, I'd love to chat with you a little bit about our Swiss proposal. I just need to get a little more feedback from you guys about what you think is going to work and what might not. So we can work on that. All right. So we're just going to start with a quick, as much as it would be so great to do this all together, there are enough of us, I think, that we probably should go into some breakout groups. So let's just spend a couple minutes of checking in and how are you and how's it going, and just saying hello and catching up a little bit because it's been a while. And I think Adam is going to put us in random groups, and we'll just take Katie about 5 minutes for this. Yeah.
I have been trying to problem solve this. I do not have breakout room access right now. I don't see that option at the bottom of my screen. Does it?
Okay, I can create them quickly.
Sorry.
No problem.
In the meantime, I'll do a little interpretive dance. Hi, Tracy. Hey, Christine. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Hannah. Oh, I hadn't seen you guys. Hey, Barbara. Oh, it's great to see you all.
Okay, I'm opening breakout rooms for everybody.
Thanks, Katie.
So have fun chit-chatting, and we'll see you back in 5 minutes. And for if you guys are looking for slides, they are posted on the NEPBIS website. If you go to the TOT materials section, then on the left-hand side, it has a list of the training dates, and today's booster training is listed there. And you can access the slides there if you want to follow along on your own.
Perfect. So we just wanted to give, I think we just have like 20 minutes or so for Brandy and I to both give you updates on kind of different pieces that we've been working on. But one of the pieces, and we heard it in the breakout room that I was in, that we're seeing is that schools are in kind of one of two places in response to the pandemic and everything else that has come our way in 2020. In some cases, schools had really solid MTSS systems in place, and were able to use that to respond and sort of adapt their systems. And in other cases, where there wasn't something strong in place to begin with, or where the people were just trying to get started, folks are kind of stuck and not really sure how, like, rolling out MTSS is a big undertaking under normal circumstances, and 2020 has given us so much more to try to deal with. So we've been trying to think about how to guide schools and districts with respect to kind of what to prioritize. Adam, I think if you can go to maybe slide 6. I don't know if we lost Adam.
So you don't see me?
I think it's also, maybe on your screen, Adam, it's showing slideshow, but on ours, we're just seeing the file open.
Oh. Sorry. It said something weird about it being paused.
Okay,
So-
I'll jump in and I can jump in and present or share my screen.
Okay, if you could do that, I don't know why it was acting
This
weird.
can be a prompt for later to talk about how do you vamp during these weird transition
Yeah.
times that we have with technology
Right.
during trainings.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right,
Is that
so
working?
now you'll be able to look at a slide that matches the words I'm saying as opposed to one that doesn't match. So you're not trying to figure out what the heck I'm talking about. So, Steve Goodman and I were asked to put together a presentation for the forum in October around sort of guidance for districts. And this is a kind of a super quick snapshot of some of our thinking from that. That has been helpful as we've shared it out with schools to kind of think about where to prioritize. And so we wanted to just start by acknowledging that doing PBIS is more difficult now. It was under normal circumstances a big undertaking, but now it is even more difficult. And if you're trying to start something new under these circumstances, you've really taken on a challenge for yourself. And so one of the things we were thinking about is breaking this out by thinking about sort of the phases of responding to a crisis incident. So Katie, you can go to the next slide. Thinking about, and in a response to a crisis, there are sort of predictable phases. And so thinking about, in the initial response to the pandemic hitting, your initial job is to just ensure safety. And so schools shut down. We figured out what social distancing looked like. We figured out how to sort of make sure everybody was physically safe. And then as we move on from that, like we've mastered, most of us, not everybody in the country, but in the Northeast, we've done a decent job of figuring out how to stay physically safe. The next job that we need to do is think about how to stabilize the learning environment. And then once sort of that piece is back in place, then we can start thinking about how to do differentiation and eventually move back towards the new normal. Katie, you can just pop all of this up. And so what we were thinking about was, depending on what phase of crisis response you're in, and that varies by district and it varies by state. It varies. I was on a call this morning with people in China, in Singapore, and Romania. So it varies by where you are in the world as well, in terms of your crisis response. But the priorities are a little bit different. So if you're in that initial crisis response, your job is to just ensure physical safety. Think about your communication plan, think about your resource distribution plan that should already be in your district crisis response plan. Like you just follow the protocols. But once you move past that is where we were seeing schools struggle. And if you're just getting started, or if your MTSS system has been disrupted, we're really thinking about what would be the top priority. Like if you can't do it all right now, the top two things that we're thinking might be important to focus on right now are staff wellness and classroom practices, because you need your staff to be okay in order to do anything. And classrooms are really the only place we can impact there is no school-wide in remote, right? Like that's where kids are really engaging with teachers. And that's where we need to really build close relationships with peers and adults. And so focusing on those two things to help stabilize the learning environment and just get kids and teachers used to new routines, so that they can then move forward and focus on learning. If you already had an existing MTSS system that sort of survived that initial crisis, this is where you can start to think about enhancing your existing tier 1 system, bringing in additional mental health supports, and integrating your new social distancing protocols with your PBIS lessons, integrating it within your reinforcement system. So if you have an existing system, that's where you can kind of enhance it. But if you don't have it, sort of give yourself permission to just focus on those two priorities of staff wellness and classroom practices. But then you can't stay there. Like once the learning environment is stabilized again, which is where a lot of us are at this point, we need to move on to how to meet individual kids and staff needs, and start to differentiate based on data to meet those needs. And so again, if you're just getting started, don't grab a brand new screener and try to throw it in on top of everything else that you're doing. A, we don't know how they work in a pandemic, so starting now might be silly. And B, that you don't need to do something new. You have a lot of existing data. So use your existing data. Look at attendance, look at engagement information, look at academic assignment completion rates. You have a lot of data that you can look at to use as initial screeners. So start to think about screening using existing data if you're kind of starting, or if your MTSS system was disrupted, and begin to establish those consistent procedures from class to class and across your school. If you're in a place where things kind of kept going, this is where you could think about adding in a screener, or really making sure that your tier 2, tier 3 systems were are really tightly aligned with your enhanced tier 1. And you may need to add in some additional supports for kids at this point. But that's only if your system kind of survived. And then once we kind of move into the new normal, if we ever get there, we kind of move back into integrating that all together and into a more cohesive, trauma-informed MTSS system that's able to meet kids and teachers' needs. And so we were started to think about sort of how to break out priorities for people. And our hope was that this gives you permission to cut yourself some slack in what you're trying to accomplish this year. And that if you are in that place of trying to just stabilize the learning environment, and I heard from a couple of people in our breakout groups that, and PBIS got thrown out the window in this, or it got stopped even before we got started. Just focus on those couple of small things and just try to keep those going and provide supports to teachers and staff in that way. You can kind of, I think I just talked through a whole bunch of these pieces. So yeah, cut yourself some slack, take care of your staff in this process. When you think about, you're cutting yourself some slack temporarily, because we know that if we just install practices, it won't sustain. So we're going to need to go back and kind of build that back in, but not at this phase in the crisis. Like kind of wait until you've moved forward in that piece. Katie, you can just skip to slide 10, where we've kind of picked out a couple of key decisions that should guide your work if you're trying to decide on what to focus on within your district. So the first would be thinking about where there's an easy win. In some ways, the pandemic has opened up some conversations about social emotional support and the importance of mental health. We can capitalize on that. I mean, we didn't ask for it. We don't necessarily want the pandemic, but there are conversations happening that weren't happening before. And so take that easy win. All right, if we're worried about kids' social emotional wellness, let's talk about that. Let's think about how we can use our MTS system to support that. If you're choosing between practices, pick the practice that has the most direct impact on kids, so that we can make sure that the intervention is kind of reaching the kids that need it the most. So if you're thinking about kind of all of the things we could do, which of these is going to have the biggest, most direct impact? And then thinking about what are the current interests of policymakers with respect to kind of how you market isn't the right word, but sort of how you pitch the use of MTSS within your district, so that you're aligning yourself with the current priorities, whether that's academic engagement or closing academic gaps, or whether it's addressing kids' social emotional wellness. So sort of across all of the different areas, whether you're looking at data systems or installing practices or supporting staff, these were the sort of guiding considerations that we've kind of talked about in terms of how to prioritize. All of that is also reflected in the returning to school document that I think Brandy shared with maybe, I guess not this whole group last time, but many of you have seen this. So there's a landing page on pbis.org that's housing most of, yeah, all of the return to school documents that have come out at this point. So the thinking that I just shared and the sort of documents to support that can all be found on this landing page on pbs.org. So you can kind of go do a super deep dive there. We're trying to not wash away our systems. That was a Steve graphic of sand in Lake Michigan. The idea is to kind of shore up what we can and prioritize based on the most important practices that will have the most direct impact on kids at the moment. And I think because I'm not controlling the slides, I think I just talked through all of these pieces. You can go to slide 15. And I'll just share a couple of resources. So when we're thinking about kind of big ideas from all of these pieces, the idea is to build on what you already have. And if what you have kind of got knocked back down, recognize where you are and build up from where you are. Don't try to pretend that you're kind of still running. Work on reestablishing that commitment, remind people why we do this, and have those conversations about why and build that buy-in. Prioritize your leadership team and making sure that your team function is as strong as it can be. And that's where a little bit where staff wellness comes in, but also just good team practices. Check in with each other and make sure your leadership team is functioning in a way that allows it to do planning and kind of move things forward effectively. Your district is probably going to need to be doing a lot of reallocation and moving. And as we move from one learning environment to the next and back again, hopefully back again this year, as those things shift, we're going to have to kind of move resources with that. And so if you're at a school-based level, be in constant communication with your district team around how to around what resources you need and how those change as you move from learning environment to learning environment. And then of course, use your data. There are a couple of templates that are available on that landing page that I shared with you. One is around classroom practices. There are a bunch of templates around how to collect data in remote environments at the classroom level and at the school-wide level in terms of TFI and school climate. And then there's this overall planning document for teams to use that is related to that returning to school document that's available on that landing page. So if your team is kind of stuck and not sure where to go, this might be a good starting place to kind of look at what are the guidance documents saying, and then what are the action steps that need to come from that. And so this sort of has some guided questions that you can look through and work your way through with your leadership team. So questions or reactions to any of that, and then I'll turn it over to Brandy to share her resources. Or are we not doing questions? We're just talking.
There's time for questions if anyone has questions or reactions. And if not, I can turn it over to Brandy.
And for folks, I can see you're all in different environments. So if you're in school and can't unmute or anything like that, feel free to use chat because at least one of us is usually kind of monitoring. I think that the kind of splitting out getting started versus strengthening has been really helpful because we keep having conversations where we see schools and districts getting stuck. And so that idea of how do we kind of start small and build momentum for schools that are in the getting started piece, and then how can we leverage what systems are in place for those districts that are already ready to enhance, I think is a really helpful way to think as a trainer about what resources are you going to pull, what technical assistance are you going to provide. So that's been a really helpful conversation, I think, for a lot of us. And one of the places we've watched a lot of folks either pull for resources or go to resources are around social emotional learning and trauma. And so that was one of the recent resources that came out from the center that we just wanted to make sure folks were aware of and had seen. And I think for some, but maybe not all of you, you saw that link and maybe have even had a chance to peek at it. but I was going to take a second, and if it's okay, I might grab the screen sharing.
Yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
Okay. So this is a table. This is not a fancy slide. This is just a table directly from the resource that was sent earlier. And what I've appreciated about some of the resources that have been developed, this one was developed by Lucille Eber, Susan Barrett, and some of the folks who do a lot of the work on the integrated systems framework, is they've been pretty honest about what we know and don't know. So a lot of the trauma-informed practices and pushes that have pushed down into tier 1 have zero evidence to support them. And so that's not to say there aren't amazing trauma-informed practices at tier 3, like multisystemic therapy is incredibly evidence-based. But as it's pushed down into tier 1, we actually don't know a ton about what works. And so as schools are embracing kind of random practices that bill themselves as trauma-informed, it's just like every other thing that comes down the pike. There's probably good elements and there's probably bad elements, and research hasn't taught us which ones are which. And so because of that, the group has gotten together thinking about how we use what we do know about good practice and trauma-informed care, and how do we infuse that into the core features that we already know to be effective. And so the brief has a ton of detail and a lot of really good resources, but I think this table is helpful to just think about where do we not overhaul, not throw things out, but really just think about enhancing the work that we're doing. And while this is an example for trauma, I think a lot of similar things apply, whether we're talking trauma or SEL or whatever folks are thinking about at the moment. So again, I think as a trainer, for me, these resources help me bring teams back to here are the core features of practices, systems, and data. Here are ways that we kind of enhance or push a little bit into the need areas. And I think one of the, I was just on a call with Susan and Steve, and we were chatting about kind of where do we push trauma all the time into tier 1 and where does it just some of the time push into tier 1. And so I think as we're training and we're responding to different pressures or pulls for the current moment, being careful that we're using data to guide our decisions and not making assumptions, right? Not assuming that the pandemic has been traumatizing for all students or all educators, also not assuming it hasn't, right? Being able to use data to guide our decisions about where we need to intensify supports for all in tier 1, or where we need to provide targeted or really intensive supports for some or a few. So the trauma resource is one that if you didn't have a chance to read it, I think would be helpful, because this is a topic that we continue to hear. And it's a way to, again, help use that to help ground people in effective practices and systems with enhancements, but not throwing things out that we know to be evidence-based for things that we don't have a lot of confidence in as a field. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your faces again. So there are other resources I can share, but I thought maybe we'd pause and have a quick conversation about that piece, because I do think trauma-informed has been a really prevalent conversation. And Katie, let us know timing-wise, because I do not have the agenda open.
Yeah, we have until 1:45.
Okay, perfect.
So plenty of time.
So what are some of the things you're hearing from schools and districts that you work with or work in related to this? And how have you been able to help support, or where do you have questions or things that might be helpful for us to do a deeper dive into? And again, feel free to use chat if you're not in a spot to be able to unmute.
Randy, hi, it's Stacy.
Hi.
Hi. A lot of talk around trauma, obviously in New Hampshire, like everywhere. Looking at and building and training at the district level and giving schools and teachers guidance around this. So I'm working on that from a systems level right now, because it can quickly grow into an issue where everybody wants to be trauma informed. It sounds wonderful. However, it is creating some problems at the elementary level where I have been working, where teachers are allowing way too much for some kiddos that, yes, they have had trauma in their life, but we cannot let all the structure go or expectations go either because of that. So in my prior role just last year as behavior specialist and working with the district BCBA, we just saw a lot of increased behavior because people want to be trauma sensitive. So we need to give schools, administrators, teachers some guidelines around this, some training, some resources, you know, and right now I'm just trying to build that in the district, or we could create more issues.
I will find the link after this conversation and pop it into chat. But I have so appreciated listening to Susan Barrett, Lucille Eber, and other members of their team, but them in particular, because one of the messages that they have always given pre-COVID, but continue to give during the pandemic, is how tier 1 practices are trauma informed, right? The creating predictable, safe routines, positive expectations, positive climate, like that is tier 1, whether you're talking trauma informed social emotional learning, PBIS, or whatever. So I think, to your point, Stacey, helping folks understand that by doing really strong tier 1, they are being supportive. And that does include, again, predictable routines, high positive expectations, and holding students to those. I think the places that it gets more nuanced is especially as we're moving up the triangle with taking into consideration students' learning histories. And to me, that's what we've been doing for a lot of years in the work we do up the tiers. But I think helping folks really think about and understand tier 1 being critical to trauma-informed support is a really helpful starting place. Are other folks hearing similar questions, pushes? One of the other messages that, again, I was just chatting with Susan, and she was talking about how important it is, and it showed up in the table I just showed, having folks with that expertise on teams so that it's not siloed, but it's brought into the work. But again, ensuring that that's brought in an evidence-based way, because in the climate where kind of the next thing is bright and shiny, right now it feels like trauma has become the next thing. And so for sure, we need to make sure that we're honoring and respecting and creating interventions based on students' experiences. And we want to make sure those are evidence-based and likely to set students up for success, because we don't want to exacerbate challenges they're already having by letting behaviors go unchecked.
Brandy, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would just jump in and say some of the districts that I've been working with are struggling with, they have some data, work not being submitted, students not being present, distance learning, that type of stuff, but they don't know the whys always behind it and how to support that with students. They don't know if it's trauma or just a lack of, maybe support in the home or support with materials. So that's something that I've noticed.
Yeah, so how do you kind of almost do a functional assessment with the data that you have to better understand the why, kind of what's behind it, and then based on that map onto intervention? I think that's a really good point. And we push database decision making, but there's a lot of skill that has to go into that piece.
Just just quick by way of sharing, I don't have data to back it up. Sorry, Mary Jo, to cut you off. In our district, what we did during the first couple of days when we came back, we had a few extra days for PD and training and all that. We offered to all teachers a PD pretty much on trauma-informed teaching. So we provided like the nuts and bolts of what a trauma-based approach to teaching is. And then a few weeks into the new school year, we got all psychologists and all mental health together, social workers, guidance counselors, and we had an outside, a community located trauma expert team present, answer questions, and I think that was effective. Again, I don't have data to back up my claim, but those were two things we did, and people were very receptive to those.
That's great. Someone else was also going to chime in.
Yeah, I was yesterday, Mary Jo and I were working with a district, and they were having a really difficult time pivoting because the behaviors that they saw last year are not existent anymore, because either they're in school and they have masks on and all of these behaviors are not being exhibited anymore, or they're remote and those behaviors are not there anymore. So they were having a hard time shifting. And what we did was we gave them the task of making a remote matrix. So, and they came up with some really good ones. So, and they even stuck with their same acronyms, like one was STAR. So they made their remote matrix with using the same STAR acronym, and the other one was PRIDE, and they used that. So that was really helpful. But they are having trouble kind of, well, these behaviors aren't there anymore, and wanting to throw it away, where we were like, no, let's just shift it to something that you can actually utilize now that aligns. So that was helpful for us.
I think that's fantastic. And for folks who haven't had time to play with some of the resources, there's really nice examples. The brief on, I think it's called using the teaching matrix and remote instruction, it's some combination of those words, has been downloaded over 24,000 times as of yesterday. So it's
We
just
shared that yesterday. That was helpful.
That one is getting huge play. So I think it's nice to have those ranges of examples. I think that's a really fantastic thing to think about. The other thing you made me think about is I keep wanting schools, educators, districts to take this opportunity to think about pro-social behaviors and engagement, because they have, not everywhere and not with all kids, but in a lot of kind of especially remote and somewhat in hybrid where there's fewer students, they have opportunities to think about what they want to see, because the disruptive behaviors are not the same, especially if kids are behind a screen. So to me, it's a huge opportunity for us to take the moment to really have folks focus on what we've always wanted them to focus on. But sometimes the disruptive behaviors are distractors for them. So I love that you push them to still do the matrix and to think about what it looks like now and what behaviors we want to encourage that will help kids generalize back into the new normal, or whatever descriptor we're using for that. I think we've got only about 1 more minute for conversation, but any other observations, questions, feedback?
I saw in the chat that I think it was Hannah said a lot of schools right now are almost resorting back to a train and hope because they're short on time and resources and things like that. And I totally agree. One of the things that we've done, our project, we started like 3 years ago working on building online learning opportunities for adults. Who knew that our soft launch would become a hard launch? But so a couple of courses in particular, and I agree, we don't have necessarily evidence-based trauma-informed approaches, but we developed a self-paced course on just understanding trauma and its effects. So good starting place. And then some other courses that are about the importance of connectedness, because we do know that if kids feel connected to someone in school, and right now we're ripe for more disconnection, that's important. So one course that's about the importance of connectedness and understanding that. And then another one, I know you said, Jen, don't do new screeners, but this connectedness screener, how to do that if when you're back in school or not. So I know Michelle's been leading that work.
I love that. I was on a call yesterday with folks from the National Center for Intensive Intervention, and they were talking about check and connect, which is not check and check out, but check and connect, and or other approaches to connectedness being critical, not just for now, but to help make sure kids show back up in whatever the next phase looks like for each district. So I love that, because that is something that we have a lot of evidence for as a protective factor for all kids, and especially necessary for some and a few. I love that.
The SEL resource I shared from Berkeley has a lot of connected. It's all about connectedness, and there's some trauma-informed resources. When you click on each of the individual areas, you have to, Claudia, why don't you talk about it more, because you're the one that knows it. I know we have limited time, but it's such a valuable resource.
If you click on that link that Mary Jo put in the chat, it will have there's 10 different topics. And then, so one is self-regulation, one is empathy, one is compassion, one is self-compassion. So there's all these different topics. You can click on the topic, and then if you go to each topic to the, it's not resources, it's, there's 3 tabs across. One is why this is important, and then there, activities. That's not the word. But anyway, the third tab over on the right, it will take you to numerous activities that you can just embed with adults, children, and they're all very SEL tier 1 type activities. So and there are tons and tons and good ones. So use that, save that resource for sure. You'll want to look at it later.
That's great. I just saw a private chat about the trauma-informed TFI. So 2 things. One is there will be, hopefully in the relatively near future, recognizing that's like weeks or maybe even more than a month because of December. There will be an enhanced TFI guide that crosswalks, but in an integrated way, culturally responsive ISF and the return to school guidance to help push folks into thinking about enhancements. And that's very much thanks to Karen and Jen who have led that. In addition to that, there is a separate trauma-informed TFI, and I believe that lives on the Midwest page. So that's not a National Center product, I don't believe, but it's one that they've done some work with. I was just asking Susan specifically about that and like whether that also should be integrated into our integrated guide or whether that lives on its own. And I think with the conversation we were having about not assuming all communities have experienced trauma, that one probably lives on its own a little bit, although we've taken elements of it that were in ISF and put it into that integrated guide. All right, so I think I am going to turn it back over to Katie, or maybe I'm turning it back over to me. I'm not sure which thing comes next.
Yeah, well, I think that's a nice, this conversation is a nice springboard for our next discussion. And we'll send you into breakout rooms again for this. But we'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas on how you've been supporting schools at this time during a pandemic and through virtual, hybrid, and every other kind of learning. And also some of your lessons learned regarding virtual presentations, since many of us are providing this support, including today's meeting virtually. We've all had some experience, I think, both receiving and facilitating virtual trainings, and it's a great opportunity to learn from one another in terms of how to engage folks, how to increase opportunities to respond. So I'm dropping in the chat some sort of discussion prompts. And before I open up the breakout rooms again, we're trying something new this time to help, facilitate this conversation. And it's called Jamboard. So has anyone used Jamboard as a part? Okay, so some people are familiar with it. Great. So in case you haven't had a chance to use it yet, and I'll drop the link in the chat in just a second, but first I'll just share my screen and show you how to use it and access it. Because the idea is once you get on here, and again, I'll share this link in a moment, but once you get on here, there are multiple different boards. So the first 2 are to help support your conversation, this next conversation about training and coaching in 2020. And anytime you want to add an idea or a sticky note, either your own or maybe a main idea that your group is talking about, you can type it in there and then save it, and it will post it onto the board. So you'll be able to see your own ideas posted on there as well as other people's as they're posting them. And there are 2 different boards for this first conversation. So one about virtual presentation tips, and then the first one about how you specifically have been supporting schools and what you've found to be effective. And if you want to color code your Post-its, there are actually more rooms than there are colors. But if you want to adopt a color as a group, there are 5 colors that you can choose from for Post-it notes, for those of you who like to be color coordinated. Any questions before we send you off into your new breakout rooms?
Katie, remind me how much time we have. for this conversation?
We have about 15 minutes.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. So I'll drop the link now. And you should be able to, oops, was that just to Christine Peck? No, that's it. Sent out to everybody. Okay. So you should be able to access the Jamboard there. And I will open the breakout rooms for everyone. And if you have any questions, feel free to stick around and ask, and we'll see you in 15 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. So we could see a bunch of really great ideas being posted on the boards as you guys were talking. So that's really exciting. Is there anyone, we maybe don't have time for every single group to summarize and share out, but we'd love to hear some of your favorite ideas or a summary of your discussion from your groups if there are people who are willing to be spokespersons for your group.
Can somebody share the squirrel idea? With the squirrel sharing, it was like ideas around having people relax and having squirrels share their emotions. I want to do that. I don't know who posted that. It was an orange group. Oh, I think that's you. Is that you, Marlene? You're sharing, but you're on mute.
Oh, if you want to unmute yourself, there's a down at the very bottom left
I didn't
corner.
realize. Yeah, I didn't realize I was muted. Sorry about that. We were just saying we're doing a lot of PLCs for administrators across the state in early childhood right now. And so we always do some sort of check-in, but we try to make it be also like an icebreaker that's a little bit of fun. And one of them is that they just post 9 pictures of squirrels. I'm not sure where we got it from. And each of them has a number. And somebody, you know, and one squirrel looks like he's like laying on the ground exhausted, and another one's like overeating, and, you know, another one's kind of going crazy with his arms. And then you could just interpret, you might just say, I feel like a 3 today. And then they say something about themselves. Like, oh, it's been a hard day at work, or had a tough time with the kids, or I feel like celebrating because this went well. But it just seems to be a fun way to talk about emotions and just a nice icebreaker. So the squirrel thing is just like an icebreaker introduction piece when we start our meetings that we're doing.
I do that with a lot of my meetings, and I have found pictures with cats and cartoon characters and, you know, the many faces of SpongeBob or whatever. And you can, it's just a nice way to change up how are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10. And
it's just fun. I think people and everybody's willing to say something. We find that it's easy to get people to participate with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ones out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I love that idea. Thank you for sharing.
Is there a particular place where you find those images? Like, is there a website we should be looking at, or a particular way to image search that?
I can check. I'm not the person who found it. I just get to use it. So I'll check to see where they're coming up with the squirrels and the other animals.
Thank you.
Yeah, I bet like a Google image search could be helpful at that too.
So one of the places I felt like our group spent a lot of time talking was kind of meeting schools where they're at. And Karen gave the example of kind of paralleling our thinking about students struggling in the COVID slide to cutting ourselves some slack, recognizing we've had an impact. We've been impacted by this as well. And so kind of we had the conversation that went along with the PowerPoint presentation Jen had done earlier about based on where schools are at, kind of where do we go? And how do we help schools that are stuck do small things to move them forward? I'm sure other folks in my group could have summarized that a little bit more eloquently, but.
That's great. I also saw on the second board of virtual presentation tips, a number of people mentioned Pear Deck. Does someone want to give a brief description of how that works?
When I've used Pear Deck, you can create a slide presentation and turn it into a video so it becomes a self-paced training module, but you can stop it and build in response activities. So rather than just sitting and watching the presentation, it stops and the person has to respond to a question or slide things on a screen or answer something or input. So you can do some formative assessment or checking in comprehension along the way, or having them just respond and create artifacts along the way. It's a great tool.
That's cool. And can you get does it cost anything, or is it free, or?
I don't know what it is now. It is a cost thing. You do need a subscription. It was free for a while, then it went back to a paid subscription. I think it might have reverted back to free. All these things are kind of on a day-by-day, month-by-month basis. To do all the really fun stuff, there is a cost to it.
Great. Anyone else want to share out your discussions or ideas?
Susanna asked me to share about the mood light, and I put the link in the chat. It's a great little tool where you can start I often start a session with it where everybody can go in and click on like, how are you feeling today? And then and it gives oh my gosh, way more feeling words than I ever even knew existed. And I just put a screenshot in of a result of one of them as well, so that you can see what shows up on the screen. And it's a great way to kind of get a read of the room as to where everybody's at, and also provide people an opportunity to respond and see where everybody's going, and then you can have a little bit of conversation. I think one of the things that I'm finding is that as I bring schools together, right now you have to allow a few minutes of just checking in time, because people need connections right now that they're not getting in other places.
Yeah. And it's a great way for you as the trainer to get a sense of the mood in the room.
Like greeting at the door, right? I mean,
right.
That was our participants too. Yeah. One of the joys of Zoom is I have terrible name memory, so it's so great. Like, like, hey, so and so, I know who you are. It's very exciting. That is a positive of training in online. But yeah, it's nice to greet.
As long as they don't sign on from someone else's.
Oh yeah, that's true. Their kids' names and stuff like that. Yeah, and then that I get thrown off by that.
Well, thank you all for sharing. In a minute, we're going to do another breakout session around the .q, which hopefully people got a chance to sort of practice using on a recent presentation, whether it was a recorded presentation or one that you watched live during one of the live conferences. And we've been working as a team. Some of you who are here today have helped with this process of revising the .q and updating it. So we're calling it the .q 0.2 or 2.0. And the rationale behind that was, we tried to condense the existing tool and to really kind of hone in on those items that are most sensitive to change over time, and those that would be most closely related to like meaningful feedback for presenters. So some of the items that were previously on the .q were dichotomous, and we removed those. And we also kind of reorganized things a little bit. You'll still see the train logic there, but there were some items that were related more to content knowledge. And so we separated those out from the bulk of the items that were related to presenter behaviors, so that, as a presenter, you would get feedback on both of those pieces, and they were kind of separated out. So hopefully you had an opportunity to take a look and to practice using this new tool with a presentation that you observed. So again, the train, the teach, relate, adapt, implement, and navigate are still part of the .q, and that's actually the main organizing structure for the different items. And we would love to hear your feedback on this new organization, since you guys are all pretty familiar with the tool, having been part of the TOT. So we'd like both kind of general feedback on just what do you think of these changes broadly? Does it seem more sensitive to change? Does it seem like it would provide helpful information to participants? And we'd like to hear how it worked, if you got a chance to use it to observe and score a presentation. And then certainly if you have any recommendations, whether those are structural recommendations or wording or items or content, we'd love to hear any ideas that you might have to improve this revised version. And I don't know, Susanna or Christine, do either of you want to say anything about the revisions or the new tool before we break out again?
Katie, I think you did a fantastic job.
Okay. So we have another Jamboard, or two more other Jamboards, and you might have, if you previewed during the last session, you may have seen these. So we have two more Jamboards for you to use to provide feedback. And Michelle just asked if there's a link to access the tool. Either Adam or Susanna, could you pull that link up from, okay, Adam's on top of it, thank you. So you'll be able to access the tool too. So you can use the same link before from the breakout rooms. And I will again drop in some prompts for your discussion. So again, first, if you can take 15 minutes or so to discuss your thoughts about the new tool or your experience in using it, or you can take the time to review the tool and kind of gather your thoughts. And then if you have any ideas to post on those boards, that is greatly appreciated. And if you want to nominate someone from your group to summarize your discussion and the main points, then we'll come back together after 15 minutes and debrief a little bit. Okay, and I will open up new rooms for everyone.
Thank you all so much for your conversations. This is another challenge. It's like, how many breakout groups do you do within 2 hours? Like, are 3 enough or should it be 2? I mean, those are these questions that I think we're all struggling with, is making sure that we're kind of not having things feel too choppy. Anyway, so we just wanted to spend a few minutes debriefing your feedback on the .q. I can, talk about the group, my group's feedback, but somebody want to volunteer what you guys thought about? Someone from a group, your feedback?
I'll go. I have trouble with silence, it turns out. So the pink group, or mostly pink group, the folks who were able we were able to do the .q, and it was all obviously on virtual presentation. So we were kind of looking at it for its alignment and sensitivity to that sort of a presentation. Surprise, surprise. And we were talking about that opportunities to respond are so important, and I think even more important in the virtual, or you lose people, that, and this is our pink one here, size matters, that maybe we should have smaller sessions so that you can do that. And then they're taped anyway. And so that even if someone can't attend, or you do repeat sessions, at a conference, even if you can't attend, you can watch and you get to see some good OTRs. We also talked about perhaps things, again, that relate to virtual, making sure that all of the materials are available to folks, that they don't have to think when they're there trying to take in this information, but you've removed the other lift for them. And then some wording about, you know, we were being a little bit rubric policey. I think we own that and like it. That 2B on OTRs, we were stuck on that. Some of the anchors were you have ample and or, and that some of those things would be nice if spread out. And lastly, it would be great if for all of the items or as many as possible, it said, you know, so for example, this might look this way in live, it might look this way, or face-to-face in virtual.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ellen. That's really helpful. And your group. Our group also talked a little bit about sort of some re-looking at differentiating across the rubric and making sure that the different categories feel a little bit more distinct in different places, because sometimes it's hard. Yeah, that's really helpful. But the face-to-face and live is a great distinction. Although I know that a lot of us are learning, you know, all these creative ways to do OTRs hopefully will carry us through into some of our live face-to-face trainings as well. Other group feedback? Who else would like to share?
We talked about how having the rubric more detailed and having specific descriptors associated with each number was really helpful. But Mary Jo was sharing that she would like it to include sort of a built-in section or space to write or add evidence to support each score.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. That's helpful. Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, clarification for the key would be helpful. We talked about visuals actually, and just doing maybe some kind of guide at the top too for the key. That's terrific. Other feedback, other folks? I know there were more groups. All right. Well, we appreciate you all writing everything down, and we're going to take your feedback and incorporate it into our continued revisions, and we'll share it again with you. I think another question that we have is sort of thinking about when we will roll this out, but we'll keep you posted, and we just really appreciate your time. We know how stretched everyone is right now. So
yeah,
Katie,
thank you for the feedback. And before we jump on to the next, or sort of to the wrap up, I guess, just to let you know that all of these great ideas that you shared on Jamboard, you can access if you have a any kind of Google account. So you can access Jamboard from, you know, if you go into any sort of Google, whether it's the search engine or whatever it is, you get those 9 dots in the top upper right-hand corner, and you can click on Jamboard there and see any of the boards that you've participated in. So particularly for the conversation before around ideas for engaging and increasing OTRs during virtual training, you guys can revisit those anytime you want on your own.
But thank you all again, for helping support the work to develop, you know, future trainers and to provide some kind of direct observation tool that we can use to help, you know, again, help folks move from where they are to where they want to be, and, you know, and to improve training behavior. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye, Barb. I know folks are needing to leave a little bit early, but we're just gonna kind of do a quick wrap up and spend a few more minutes talking about some additional resources. I wanted Adam to just share with you, for folks who are still in the process of, who are in the TOT still, cohort 5 folks, or maybe cohort 4 folks who haven't quite finished their presentation opportunities. There are lots of opportunities for you to either observe or potentially present. Maybe Adam, if you could share a little bit about what we're doing with the PBIS Academy, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna. And I think, Katie, you have the slides, so thank you for pulling everything up. So as Susanna said, because we are not doing full day trainings anymore, we are breaking them up into a bunch of 2-hour sessions that are monthly. There are lots and lots and lots of trainings going on pretty much every week. So that does provide lots of opportunities to actually sit in and observe. You don't have to travel anywhere, which is great. So the things to think about are whether you want to sit in on a coach's meeting or a team training. Again, as many of you know, the different feels of them. One's can be more, the coaches will be a little more discussion based. Although honestly, we are trying to make them as discussion based as possible. And then the team training may be a little bit more, quicker OTRs and things like that. So the key thing to think about, and I can throw the links in the chat, is we actually created a syllabus, which is kind of less rigorous than a traditional one, but it kind of gives you an outline of when the meetings are at. And it'll kind of have hyperlinks to the Zoom meetings. If you could please just let me or any like Susanna or Katie know if you would like to sit in on one of the meetings. And then we can just alert the trainers and give them a heads up. Again, they're doing breakout rooms as well, and they just like to know if folks are going to be there. And they've always been so welcoming to you all, and some of you are helped with the trainings as well. But yeah, and if there is a request for kind of delivering some of the content, we could help facilitate that discussion as well. I think the key things to think about is what's nice in the syllabus that I'm going to put in the chat, the link. You'll be able to see what content is expected to be delivered during those sessions. So you can peruse, and if there is something that you want to see, one of the wonderful trainers present, you can kind of look and try to find those times. And then the dates and times are there, and there's multiple kind of cohort subgroups within each section, and you'll see like a 6B or 6A. And the other thing and I probably am running out of time, but the other thing I want to add is we actually have a high school specific cohort this year, which we're super excited about. And that's cohort 7B, and I can throw that in the chat as well. And so if you're interested in seeing what a high school looks like, oh, thank you, Katie. Yeah, so if you look at that, this is our tier 1 training materials, and you'll see on that link on the bottom left of the page, you'll see year 1 syllabus, year 2, and year 3. And you can see the content on those pages. So go to those pages, take a look, you'll see the training dates, you'll even see the Zoom links. Just give us a heads up so we could let the trainers know. And we might even kind of make sure there's only like 1 or 2 additional folks per a session if we get multiple requests. But I don't think that's going to be a big issue. So Susanna, Katie, did I miss anything? Is there anything? No.
That's great, Adam. I think on the next slide, there's maybe a picture of, I forget whether it's the schedule or the syllabus. We're going to probably come back to you again with some more training material updates. It's so interesting, like all of you, we've had to rejigger, and Adam and Katie have particularly done a lot of rejiggering of like really thinking about how to hone training materials down. So we'll come back to you. What that's going to look like next year, we'll let you know, but it'll be interesting to get your feedback too on some of the NEPBIS training materials. But we've updated formatting, and I shouldn't say Adam and Katie and other folks have updated formatting, and it's all very streamlined. So we also look forward to your feedback about that. All right, just in our last couple minutes, Adam, do you want to, yeah, so I will just mention again, as always, that we are behind in kind of the re-endorsement process, but we are thinking about it and slowly getting back to that re-endorsement for folks who are still, again, thinking about finishing up their requirements. These are just the requirements about finishing up homework and doing some videos. And again, these can be all online videos as well of your training. So we would welcome those, and we'll review those as they come in. Just stay in touch and let us know. So we're happy to continue to support folks in their journey to endorsement. I think one question that we have And just a reminder for folks who already are endorsed that we will be asking you for a video that demonstrates the NEPBIS content with a self-completed docu, as well as training evaluations from at least one school team, data from a school or district that you've demonstrating fidelity. Again, that's a TFI usually, but it could also be the BOQ. And then also we'd love outcome data if you have it. And then finally, just coming to these booster sessions like you are today or listening to them. I think there are lots of folks that weren't able to join us today. So, and then Adam, if you don't mind popping ahead. Oh, Hannah had that great question. So if folks could respond in the chat about Swiss facilitation, if anybody has any advice around organizing payment or thanks, Hannah, for bringing that up. I forgot about that. I didn't have a good answer to that. So if anybody wants to respond to that in the chat, that would be great. And I will also remind you that we are going to be doing the Northeast PBIS conference this year is going to be virtual. We made that decision. It's going to still be May 13th and 14th. So mark your calendars. As many of you have experienced, we are not going to do 2 full days of video conference. So we're working on narrowing things down. We know probably we will have, we will most likely have Ruthie Pano-Simmons be one of our keynote speakers. She's wonderful. So we're really excited about that. And I think George will probably be our other keynote speaker. We still have to just finalize all the details around that. And then we're also really trying to, like we've all been doing, we're really trying to kind of condense things. So my guess is that we'll have probably parts of those 2 days for the Northeast PBIS. So stay tuned, you'll get an e-blast and stuff like that. We're just still trying to work out some of the details. We'd love some feedback too. We usually do these boosters in relation to our conferences, but I think, you know, if there's anything that we can be helpful with, like just we'll get your feedback. I mean, I don't know that we want to add another Zoom meeting on top of the conference, so we might do it separately like we've done this time, and maybe after the Northeast PBIS conference. So we'll keep you posted about that. And Adam, do you have, yeah, if you have any suggestions for future boosters, that's great. And other than wrapping up, and I have, if the folks from cohort 5 could stick around for just a minute, that's all I have for content. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? I'll just say again, it's so great to see you all, and you should, you know, thank you for all your amazing work and stay healthy. And it's wonderful to see you. Some faces I haven't seen in a long time and some folks seen recently. So it's really lovely. Take good care and we'll be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. And cohort 5 folks, if you don't mind sticking around for a minute, that would be awesome. Bye, all. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Susanna, do you mind if I lurk because I want to hear about this?
Oh, sure. Lurk away.
Thank you.
So I'm so sorry. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around for a minute. I felt like my open-ended question to all of you was a little vague. And I'm not quite sure what to do. Like, I love this idea of this expanded Swiss facilitator training, but I also know it's a lot to ask. And like 3 or 4 hours a week across 10 weeks is a ton. So, you know, I'm excited that we worked on this pilot, but at the same time, like asking you all to do something like that feels like a lot. So just wanted to get your feedback in person about it.
Susanna, can I ask what time of day we're looking at? Are we looking during the workday? Are we looking at night? Are we looking?
It would be up to us. It would be up to us. We can decide. It's our group, so we can decide.
And Susanna, could you clarify some of the additional content? Like you had, there was some data decision-making process stuff, and I thought fidelity measures. I was just curious about that.
There's a PBIS apps overview. There's a little bit more in depth on the TFI. And then the traditional Swiss facilitator training, and then the final content is definitely around like pulling all the tools, the outcome and fidelity tools together. So looking at Swiss and looking at